So I've got something for you on the channel today that's a little bit different. I've got many requests asking me how well do these Kaminski Archery dampened barebow weights work on recurve stabilizers, and even if it's possible to put dampened barebow weights on your recurve stabilizers, and ultimately, does it make a difference? So yeah, like I said there in the intro, I am looking to test these Kaminski Archery dampened barebow weights on these stabilizers. It's just something that I've had requested actually several different times because there's a lot of people out there that do shoot Olympic style recurve, that shoot north of 8 ounces on their stabilizers or right at 8 ounces on their stabilizers. And that's actually what I use when I'm using these Ramrod Ultra V3s with just standard weights on the end of the rods. I actually end up using 8 ounces of weight on all 3 stabilizers. So it works out in my favor to set up different setups, maintain the same overall mass weight, the same balance of the bow, and just change out the dampers or lack thereof, and then be able to see how much of a difference it makes as far as feeling is concerned. So what I'm going to start with is just 8 ounces of standard solid weight mounted directly on the rod on all 3 stabilizers. So on the long rod and on each side rod, I've got 8 ounces. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take off these weights, remove 2 ounces of weight, and put on these Doinker A-Bombs that are 1.7 ounces without this stud here that's on this long end. And then when I have this stud in it, it's a full 2 ounces. So when I take 2 ounces off the actual weight stack, I can put this in place, use a standard recurve stabilizer damper, and then ultimately swap that out for the Kaminski Archery dampened barebow weight. And I'm here at 30 meters. I've got a 80 centimeter face down there, and I'm just gonna shoot at that. I have the camera positioned here in a very specific place because when I'm shooting like this, the camera is gonna get the best representation of the sound of the bow that you would feel or that I feel as the shooter. And that way, hopefully it translates a little bit on camera so you can hear it a little bit more and experience it some along with me, as opposed to me just telling you what the actual differences are. And yeah, so just letting you know that's why the camera is here, because especially when I put it up in front of me, when I'm shooting that direction, it picks up weird sounds on the bow that you don't even hear it when you're shooting. And I only notice when I'm starting to edit the video, man, that bow just sounds like garbage, right? It's because it's from a different angle. So very important in my opinion. And I will not move the camera. I won't move my position. I got my standing position here marked. So hopefully I will, be as thorough and consistent as possible. Unfortunately, I don't have any of the devices or the actual measuring devices to measure vibration feedback in the bow. I don't have that stuff here. That's with Thomas over in Austria. And when we go over there, that's when we do some data gathering to test things like tiller bolts, pocket weights, and ultimately the dampened barebow weight dampers. So I just don't have that here. Maybe at some point I'll be able to have that here. It's just right now, it's not in the budget, to get something that is actually good and replicates the data in the exact same way that we do over in Austria. That way we can speak the same language. It's just a bit out of my price range at the moment. So I'm gonna shoot a few arrows to warm up, get comfortable, and then I will start swapping out parts and let you know what I think about it along the way. So I shouldn't feel anything different in the way it aims and the way it delivers the arrow, but everything after the arrow is gone as the bow is vibrating, that's when I'll feel a difference in the actual setups. And so what I feel is mainly lots and lots of limb flutter and stabilizer oscillations after the arrow is gone. So I can just feel, and this literally sums it up. If I smack the stabilizer, or sorry, the limb, the top limb, watch this stabilizer. I don't know if you'll be able to see it. And you can also watch the other limb as I hit this one. Just see that wop, 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 wop. That's what I feel. So with no dampers on the bow, when I shoot, I can just feel the bow kind of just really oscillating big. And I think a lot of that has to do with the actual stabilizer itself, because this is a weaker stabilizer, and having 8 ounces of weight with no damper on it is pushing the stabilizer near its limit to feel clean and crisp. You know, Ramrod's got that nice selector on their website to tell them how much weight you use, and then depending on what stabilizer you're using, how it would feel. And it just feels I mean, it's almost all exclusively the stabilizer is what I'm feeling as far as this vibration, this oscillation is concerned. And I mean, it's fine, but it's just doesn't have a nice feedback. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go get those arrows, because I've only got one left in the quiver, swap out this standard stack of weights for the Doinker A-Bomb, and shoot some more arrows, and I'll tell you what the change is. All right, so as I swap these out, I want to further explain a little bit as to what I felt with just the weights on the bar. So what I was feeling was not just a large amplitude of vibration, but I was also feeling an inconsistency from shot to shot as well. So when I would shoot, if I made slightly different mistakes, then the bow would give not just audio feedback of different sounds when I made mistakes, because of, you know, the string interfering with my arm guard. So the harmonic hum after the shot would change, like the length of time or how sharp it was, things like that. But I could also feel that a lot in the bow, because I could feel the stabilizers oscillating a lot more, a lot less from shot to shot, depending on how the shot went. Obviously, I was just warming up, so that wasn't perfect on every single shot. So just additional feedback as to what I actually felt. But now you can see the configuration that I'm using here. So this is a Doinker A-Bomb with 5/16 24 threads on each side, and then 6 ounces of weights. So each one of those little divots is 1 ounce. These are the standard Ramrod solid weights mounted on this Doinker A-Bomb. And I put all 3 of them in the exact same configuration, where I have all 6 ounces of weight out past the end of the damper. This is kind of a standard stabilizer setup, where most people would set this up with the damper against the rod and then all the weights hanging out at the end. This is a fairly stiff damper, so meaning it can hold a lot of weight. It's not actually stiff, it absorbs a lot of vibration too, but you can put many more than 8 ounces out on the end before it starts to really interfere with how the bow aims and how steady it is when at full draw. So this is a fairly standard configuration. I'm mentioning this because you can manipulate and modify the way the bow feels depending on where you have the weights in the stack. If I put half of the weights down against the stabilizer rod and then half hanging out at the end of the damper, it would offer a different feel than all of them at the end, just like it is now. It does take a lot of time to adjust all that stuff, and it can make a difference in the way the bow feels, the way it reacts post-shot. And you know, I'd encourage people to do so, to change those things if you have a damper and have that ability, because it can definitely make a difference in the way the bow feels. And for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to mount the rod, the damper directly on the rod, and then have the weights all at the end. I'm just doing that because it's fairly standard, and I only mention that it can change the feel depending on where you put the weights before somebody else says it down in the comments below. Okay, so I'm going to shoot a few more shots and let you know what I think about it with the dampers directly on the rod. Completely different. I'm sure you could hear a difference in sound too. Yeah, So I'm feeling pretty much nothing post-shot reaction. Yeah, so it's very consistent from shot to shot. I didn't feel much in the way of difference in the way the bow reacted after letting go of the string, even when I'm making mistakes every so often. That end was definitely much better than the end before as far as the shots. But what I don't feel is that flop going on. So if I hit it with this setup, so if I hit it like this, I don't know what that noise is because everything's tight. It's weird. So I have no idea what that is. Definitely in the long rod. Everything's tight. Yeah, I don't know. I didn't hear that when shooting, although you may pick it up when the camera's up front, and other people may hear the bow. Something's weird in that. I don't know if you can hear it. Anyway, I don't feel this floppiness. When I hit the bow, you can still see that it does it 2 or 3 times, and then it kind of settles really quick. I'm hitting it in the same place. I'm hitting it with the same force. And a lot of that kind of large amplitude flop is gone. Still quite a considerable amount of high frequency hum afterwards, the string oscillation. I can hear a lot of that still, but the large amplitude of the floppiness is gone. So with that being said, I'm gonna go get the arrows, swap these out for the 8-ounce Kaminski Archery Dampened Barebow weights, and shoot them again and let you know what I think as far as how the actual bow performs and feels. So one thing that I actually may do after doing this testing is take a dampened Barebow weight and put it in the top stabilizer bushing, and then take the Doinkers, put them back on the rods, and see if that high frequency hum or that high frequency ping will go away. I bet it will, because these dampened Barebow weights are really good at taking out that 100 to 300 hertz range of vibration, and it really makes a big difference in the way the bow sounds and feels. So now you can see I've got the dampened Barebow weight mounted on the end of all 3 stabilizers. Let's see how it goes. Kind of like a hybrid between the two. You know, I really had no idea how this was going to go, and I think it's different for different stabilizers. And I do think it would be better suited for a stiffer stabilizer. However, it still does feel better than just the weights directly mounted on the rod. It's not as good as the Doinker A-Bombs mounted directly onto the rod and all the weights hanging off the end like I did before. Yeah, so kind of as I somewhat suspected after shooting the first few arrows with no dampers on the rods. Definitely when I hit the top limb, watch the bottom, and I think you'll be able to know what I'm feeling. So watching the bow do that, it definitely has more of the large amplitude on the post-shot reaction, but a considerable amount of the higher frequency ping is gone. At least that string oscillation, that string vibration seems to be a little mellower post-shot with the Kaminski Archery Dampened Barebow weight compared to just the standard Doinker A-Bomb with 6 ounces hanging at the end. This is kind of just a design parameter thing as to why it doesn't feel better on the Recurve stabilizers, at least with stabilizers that are on the weak side. I think if the stabilizers were much stiffer, you'd see less of this flop going on, and the rod would be stiffer and it would transmit the energy to be absorbed and canceled out at the end of the long rod, as opposed to going to the end, bending, and coming back to the bow and making the bow shake continuously in this, slowly dying fashion, because the rod is so weak, it's kind of oscillating on its own. And like I said, this 8 ounces is right at the upper limit of what these rods are built for, to be crisp. So I'd have to go to something much stiffer like a Beast stabilizer to use these weights to my advantage to actually get the maximum benefit of vibration reduction out of the system, and have the added benefit of the weight being a little bit more rigidly coupled to the stabilizers. Now this is going to kind of go a little bit into the weeds before I try with the Dampened Barebow weight in the top and compare how it feels with the Doinker A-Bombs on the stabilizers. But it's really important to discuss this because stabilizer theory and how you use stabilizers on an Olympic style recurve in particular are it's different, right? There's a lot going on here. So you have weight at the end of a rod, right? The lighter you make the rod, the more of the mass weight in total you can have at the end, keeping the total mass weight the same from stabilizer to stabilizer. And that's kind of how things have been going. Lighter stabilizers allow you to put more weight at the end, which makes the weight more effective at holding you still, because you think of like tightrope walkers. They're standing there with a really long pole on a tightrope, and that long pole slows down their movement so they can walk on the rope no problem. Same thing applies to stabilizer dynamics. The more weight you have at the end, the more it resists the movement, the slower it moves, the more stable you hold, etc. So that's how it's gone. It's also gone to a much thinner stabilizer, which makes them a little bit better in the wind, in that the wind, when it blows on it, it doesn't blow you around so much. So things have gotten smaller. As things get smaller, they get weaker. So there's this like never-ending fight to make the stabilizer stiffer and skinnier for your benefit, right? And so what happens with that is sometimes you get a weaker bar compared to others. And when you have a weaker bar, the rod is not so stiff, so it's not allowing all of that vibration to be absorbed by the stabilizer, put out to the end of the long rod, to then get absorbed by whatever damper you have at the end of the rod. So you have to have a much weaker damper at the end of a weaker rod to not let it whip back to you to get that vibration feedback back in your hand. If it does its job where the stabilizer stiffness and the damper stiffness are working together, that way the bar will bend or transmit that vibration energy out to the end. It will get absorbed by the damper on the end and not get transmitted back to the archer or back into the system. It's kind of how it's supposed to work. Because the Kaminski Archery Dampened Barebow weight is inherently a little bit on the stiffer side, when it's on a weaker rod, the rod is still going to oscillate and continue to put that vibration back to the archer. Whereas when you have a system like this, where you have the weights at the end of a damper, it's much weaker because it can flop around, it can bend much easier, and it's much more better suited to a weaker rod to absorb the vibration off of it. But there is a trade-off. You lose some benefit when you have this kind of setup, and I'll show you here in a second what that loss is. So when you have a weight mounted at the end of a damper, the weight is not really doing anything to hold the bow still in space as the arrow's coming out of the bow until something happens, and I'll explain that here in a second. So when I'm holding the stabilizer gently and moving around like I would when I'm aiming, the weight is not really flexing the damper very much. But when you shoot and there's a huge input of vibration or shock, the stabilizer is moving in space quite violently. Especially you can see it when I whack the top limb pocket. You can see the stabilizer move a lot. As that stabilizer is moving back and forth like this very violently, when the stabilizer moves and stops and tries to move this way, back the other direction, the weight is still continuing to move that way because of inertia, and then it stops as the rod is coming back like this. The weight wants to stay in place, and it doesn't hold the bow still, the rod still, until that weight stops moving this way, because the rod is moving freely this way, allowing the weight to go that way, bending the damper, and so there's not much clamping forces of the weight in space resisting the movement. So you're not getting really the benefit of that weight at the very end, at the moment of shock when the arrow is coming out of the bow. In theory, what you want stabilizers to do is to rigidly clamp down the bar, the end of the bar, in space to resist movement, because say if you are torquing the bow is going to want to return back to its natural state. And when it does, when you let go of the string, if it does that too violently as the arrow is still in the bow while it's coming out of the bow, it's going to transmit those weird forces into the arrow and possibly deviating the arrow from its path down range, right? Hope that makes sense. So the stiffer the stabilizer, the more rigid it holds it in space. The more you have that weight mounted directly to the rod, the more it will hold it in space. But when you put the weight at the end with a floppy damper, the rod and the weight are going to be flopping like this and not holding the bow in space. And so if memory serves me correctly, and forgive me, I don't have this data, things have changed, and the data was given to me in relation to compound, which is roughly at 300 feet per second, not 200 feet per second out of a recurve. But essentially, the arrow is out of the bow less than half the time that it takes for this weight to stop moving in space as it's flopping back and forth because the damper is so weak. So that's a general rule of thumb. So the arrow's long gone, the bow's just flopping around in space, unruly, because the weight is not holding on the end of the rod to hold the bow still, to affect the arrow less, potentially when you make mistakes, or the bow is going back to the relax point, which is brace height, where it sits at normal, at rest. I hope that kind of makes sense. It's kind of difficult for me to explain without showing you high-speed footage, which I want to get in the future, getting close to being able to get one of those cameras to make this happen so I can show you how much this weight is moving on the end of the rod and how quickly the arrow leaves the bow before this actually does anything. So when you go to a stiffer stabilizer, I bet you the Kaminski Archery Dampened Barebow weight would be better because there wouldn't be so much flopping going on in the system. The rod would still be moving, and because the Kaminski Archery Dampened Barebow weight acts a little bit better and a lot different than this, it's a system that almost self-stiffens as the weight is being bent. So in the Dampened Barebow weight, as this weight is rocking back and forth, because of the way that our design works, the damper inside essentially stiffens the further this thing moves off to one side. And as it moves, it's getting stiffer and stiffer and stiffer. That means it's resisting the movement of the rod in like a progressive fashion, instead of it just kind of being flopping around here on the end of a damper such as this. Yes, like I said earlier, I can take some of the weights and put them against the rod directly and adjust the stack. And if you have this kind of damper, I'd encourage you to do so at home because it makes a big difference. All right, sandhill cranes are in Gainesville. Yeah, so there's a lot there. And like I said, it kind of goes in the weeds a little bit. So if I had a stiffer stabilizer compared to this Ultra V3, it would be better suited for the Kaminski Archery Dampened Barebow weight to do some vibration reduction compared to this, only because the weight is so floppy. and it's going to help cancel out that odd reverberation of the stabilizers bending, transmitting that energy into the system. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to take the Kaminski Archery Dampened Barebow weight, and I'm going to put it in the top bushing as if it was a top weight. This is something that used to be very popular. It's still popular in some parts of the world to put a weight on the top of your riser in recurve archery. And I'm going to go back to the Doinkers, the A-Bombs with the 6 ounces. So in total, 8 ounces on all 3 stabilizers. It's just kind of where I happen to end up with this bow. And give it a whack. It's so weird, that noise. It's a little better now that it's really cinched down. I don't know what that is. It's weird. All right, so Kaminski Archery Dampened Barebow weight as a top weight on an Olympic style recurve. We'll see how it feels. If I had to guess, it'll feel real good post-shot reaction because the main oscillation will be gone thanks to the Doinker, the weaker Doinker on these stabilizers, and that high frequency string hum should probably be reduced dramatically, because that's what this really does well, reduces that high frequency vibration, and because it's mounted directly to the bow, it should cancel out a good bit of that. I have to go get arrows. Now we're talking way quieter. Yeah, so I can hear that string oscillation ending so much sooner because by the time the limb comes up near my ear, as the bow's rotating like this, I don't hear that limb humming and vibrating nearly as much as without this as a top weight. So it definitely makes a huge difference in the reduction of the vibration that I hear, and it's definitely reducing the amount of vibration that I feel in the handle. So, does the dampened barebow weight work for Olympic style recurve? Yes, with a caveat, it depends on the stabilizers you're running. It will be better suited on stiffer stabilizers, and it may be even better suited as a top weight. And I bet you put those in some formula limb pockets where you can screw the weight directly into the limb. I bet it'd be a big difference in the way it felt. Yeah, I mean, this is just totally dead. There's so little feedback, so quiet, and I'm definitely using the wrong arrows because these 450s have been hitting way weak down there. So even shooting an arrow that's too weak, I should be shooting a 410, still really, really quiet. Yeah, it's a pleasure to shoot this way, actually. Something I may play around with, putting something like this in the top and seeing how that goes in the future. It's a little bit heavy for me at the moment, so I'd probably have to reduce some of the weight on the stabilizers, because just throwing 8 extra ounces on the bow, half a pound, it's a lot of extra weight. But man, it sure kills the high frequency ping of the actual limbs. And you know, as you can see, stabilizer oscillation, limb oscillation goes way down much quicker because of the weaker damper mounted on a weaker rod. It's kind of just how it goes. Everybody's stabilizers are different. The amount of weight you put on the stabilizers depends on what kind of damper you want to use, and also where you want to put the damper within the weight stack. All of those things matter. But like I said, the reason I did this video was originally just to see how much of a difference the dampened barebow weight made on stabilizers, and I wasn't sure what would happen. And it was a fun little test. Hopefully this answers some of the questions out there of people using them or not on stabilizers. I know several people are actively using them on their stabilizers. Some are using them on their compounds on really stiff rods, running the big heavy 14-ounce ones. I don't know if anyone's running 21s on any stabilizers out there, but if you are running the Kaminski Archery dampened barebow weight on stabilizers, comment below and let us know. And if you're interested in anything on the channel today, especially these Kaminski Archery dampened barebow weights, I will have links down in the description below. We are shipping these worldwide. They are now in stock in silver and black. Black will be shipping very soon. We have them. I'm assembling them right now. Same thing in Austria. They're getting coated and will be assembled. So at both Kaminski Archery locations in the US and in the EU, we are shipping both silver and black in all 3 sizes currently in stock. You can get them available down in the links in the description below, and a card at the top up there to my website, jkaminski.com. Hey, if you like this video, consider sharing it. Genuinely, that really helps this channel out. Also, if you wouldn't mind, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell down below as well. That way you get notified when I upload new content. And if you wouldn't mind, also consider supporting the channel. Many different links down in the description below. I can't thank my supporters enough. Without you, I wouldn't be able to produce this content, at least not to this level. So thanks.